Lately, my GPS drones such as the Mini 4 Pro, the Air 3, the Mavic 3 Pro have been spending the majority of time in the air capturing some stunning hyperlapses for me. In today's video, I'm going to be demonstrating to you a preview of the last 3 months worth of hyperlapses that I've captured with all the drones I just mentioned. So let's get this video started. What's going on, everybody? Thanks again for tuning in to my channel. My name is Eddie, aka Mr. Eddie Nunez, and today we're going to be talking about hyperlapses, and it is the #1 feature and the #1 flight that I am doing with my GPS camera drones as of recent. Flying these GPS drones as of recently, I have fallen in love with the hyperlapse mode, and every time I get a chance to go ahead and fly these drones, I am actually just filming hyperlapses for the most part. Not really so much any video, not really so much any photos, because the hyperlapses can be so rewarding when done correctly. Now, my specific workflow for hyperlapses isn't as easy as typical pilots may think. And what I mean by that is that I just don't take my drone up in the air, start a hyperlapse mission, and then use the generated files, the auto stitch generated files that the drone produces. I actually have a more complex process to ensure that I get the best bang for my buck when I am investing time in a hyperlapse. This is why I wanted to go ahead and create this video, so I can tell you specifically my workflow. What do I do in the drone itself? Which are my favorite features within those hyperlapse mode? And then also, what is my workflow once I get to the computer and sit down to edit it? And yeah, let's go ahead and get it started, and let's break it down. All right, first and foremost, let's talk about the process in the drone itself and what I actually do in the drone when I take off. So when you go into the hyperlapse mode as one of the features of your drone, you're gonna notice that there's several different modes. There is free, there is waypoint, there is Courselock, and then there is circle. There is 3 in particular that I use, and then I use them in a very particular order depending on the scenario that I'm in and what I'm trying to achieve. The first thing to remember when shooting a hyperlapse is that you want to do it when there's a lot of movement. Now, movement doesn't always have to happen in the sky, right? Like the clouds. Movement also can happen on the ground. So you want to make sure there's things like, you know, a lot of traffic, a lot of moving vehicles, maybe perhaps a lot of people. I think about a carnival or maybe a shopping mall. You want to make sure that the area that you select to conduct your hyperlapse has all this vast majority of movement happening. And then once you determine where you're going to shoot, the movement that's happening, and you target the movement, then you can decide which mode you can try or which mode you can go ahead and do. For starters, free mode is, to me, the worst mode that you can possibly use, because there all you're doing is taking a photo every like 3 or 4 or 5 seconds. But then you're controlling the maneuver of the drone. You're not going to get anything worthwhile, I think, with free mode because you're moving the joystick. It's not going to be a cohesive movement. So for me, free mode is out the picture. Now, the number one hyperlapse mode that I always gear towards is Courselock. Courselock for me is my favorite and is actually quite the easiest. So Courselock is great when you're facing movement and you want to go towards that movement or away from movement. It is very simple to use. You just face your drone towards that area. You lock it. You want to face the drone towards the area you want to move towards. You lock it. Then you go back and face your movement, and you don't have to, shoot also towards that movement. What I mean by that is, for example, I can set the drone looking towards my right now, lock that course, and then go ahead and then move left or turn the camera left. And the drone is going to move right while the camera is facing left, if that makes sense. And I'll demonstrate a sample here of a Courselock. Courselock is extremely easy, as I said. And then what you want to do is set the interval. How fast do you want to go and how many shots? Typically, I want to capture about 300 to 400 shots. I'd rather have a long hyperlapse. I'd rather capture an entire battery on a single hyperlapse. And then I can go ahead and pick and choose the portions that I want if I don't want the entire thing. Now, from an interval perspective, I want to make sure that I set that interval to get about 300 to 400 shots, as I mentioned. But then from a speed, I find that the drone performs the smoothest at its slowest speed. So I either go with a 0.2 miles per hour speed or at the highest 0.4, but I try to keep it extremely smooth from the drone, not a lot of movement from the drone perspective. That way you get a very smooth hyperlapse. Now, the second feature, and I'm stack cranking, right? The first one that I always navigate to is Courselock. Now, the second feature I go ahead and use within hyperlapse is the Waypoint mission. Now, the Waypoint mission is extremely unique and extremely great to use when doing a hyperlapse because you can choose various points. You can start at a specific point and then throughout the journey, throughout the flight, navigate the different portions and then end at a specific location. Now, this is great when you are trying to showcase a hyperlapse at different elevations, different altitudes, and I like to use that quite frequently. So for example, I may start a hyperlapse waypoint at 100 feet, then my second point at 200 feet, and maybe my third point at 250 feet. Let's just say as an example, you can kind of see that movement of elevation, and then you can always do all these hyperlapse in reverse as well. So you don't have to go in that particular order, especially with Waypoint, which is very, very cool. Now, what I find as a best practice when using waypoint hyperlapses is that you want to limit your waypoints, your actual points, to 3 at most, maybe pushing it to 4. I find the more waypoints you add, the less consistent the drone is. So it's not going to follow that path that you set. You're going to see that it's going to skew off ever so slightly. Now, it will do that even with the 3-point hyperlapse as well. But I find there's like about a 90% success rate when you just keep it at those 3 waypoints. And I think that's the winning combo. Now, when you set waypoints, it's automatically going to determine the length of time and also even the speed. What you can't control, however, is the interval. So you want to control how many shots. And then again, it all depends on what's happening. So let me just go ahead and give you my interval settings now, which can apply for all different modes. So if I'm looking at clouds, for example, if that's what I'm going to be doing a hyperlapse of, I try to set the intervals longer because clouds, although they move fast, they don't move as fast as like humans walking around or vehicles driving around, right? So I set clouds at an interval of 5 seconds. Now, vehicles, for example, or moving objects such as humans, that I set to an interval of either 2 or 3 seconds, depending on how much movement is happening, what it is the flow that's happening. So this is all trial and error. That's the beauty of hyperlapses, is that you got to get out there and you got to go ahead and try it for yourself. And you can go ahead and tweak your settings as you start to dial them in. Now, the third hyperlapse mode that I like to use is circle. Now, circle is a 50-50 when it comes to a success rate. So usually how I set up my circle hyperlapse is that I find a point of interest. I point the drone, I search, I find a point of interest. Again, you want to make sure you have some movement. So usually your movement is going to be on the ground or sometimes even the sky, right? Depending on how you angle the drone. But let's say I'm focused at a specific building, right? And I want to do a circle around it. You want to make sure that you go ahead and track that building. Let's say, for example, it's a church, right? A church and a busy road. You want to make sure you track the church, and then you're going to do a circle. Now, when you go ahead and select the circle feature, you can either go clockwise or counterclockwise. Then it's important to consider the movement, right? So how is the movement happening? So for example, if I go clockwise, my drone is going to go this way. I want to make sure that if it's going to be going this way in a circle, that my traffic is going that way. So then it's opposite, if that makes any sense. You want to always make sure that your hyperlapses are opposite of the movement. That way you can see the actual movement in time happening. When setting up that circle hyperlapse, you want to make sure that, again, you highlight your center point, you highlight your point of interest. That is going to be extremely critical because the drone is going to keep, hopefully the drone is going to keep that point of interest right in the center as it's doing the circle. Now, I said at the very beginning that I had a 50-50 success rate, and it's been very much so 50-50. Sometimes when I do my circle hyperlapses, they come out looking horrendous. They come out looking so horrible. But that's just the nature of the game when doing hyperlapses. You're gonna have to just give them a try. Not all your hyperlapses are gonna come out as stunning as you may wish, and that's something that I'll talk more about towards the end of this video. So far, I've discussed with you the 3 different modes that I prefer within hyperlapse, which again is Courselock, Waypoints, and then circle. And then we've also discussed the interval settings, right? 5 seconds if it's clouds, 2 to 3 seconds if it's traffic. And then we also discussed speed. So 0.2 miles per hour, 0.4 miles per hour. That's all preference, by the way. You can always change these settings, but I find that this works best for me. Something else that you have to consider is you have to adjust the settings on your camera, just like if you were taking a photo, because essentially a hyperlapse is a photo, right? It's taking a still image every 3 to 5 seconds, depending on your interval setting. So as a best practice, I always set my shutter speed manual. I like to do long exposure hyperlapses. So I'm usually installing an ND1000 in the front of my drone when I'm filming traffic, when I'm doing a hyperlapse of traffic or moving people. That's going to get motion blur within my hyperlapse. So when you install ND1000 on your drone, you also need to remember that you have to go ahead and adjust your shutter speed. You want to keep your ISO at 100, right? You want to keep it as low as possible, but then you want to slow that shutter down, perhaps, half of a second, maybe even a second, so that you can get that motion blur within your hyperlapse, that natural smooth motion blur. Now you want to be careful when doing hyperlapses in high winds, because then it's going to become extremely bouncy, and you're gonna see that not even stabilizing in post, which we'll get to in a second, will help that. So even when doing a long exposure hyperlapse, you want to make sure, is this the best time to do a long exposure hyperlapse? Because if it's extremely windy and your drone is keeping your shutter open for a second, that's gonna have everything just as a big blurb instead of having shots in focus. So something else that I want to point out is that I shoot all my hyperlapses in RAW. So what that means is when you go into the menu and you're getting ready to start your hyperlapse, go to see what your export settings is. It's on the bottom right hand corner of your remote. Right, you want to make sure that you want to make sure that the drone does its automatic hyperlapse. It stitches all together and generates an MP4 file for you. But more importantly, you want to make sure that the drone is capturing every still image as a raw DNG. That's going to allow you the best quality in post-production, which is the next topic we're gonna get into. So now let's talk about my hyperlapse process once it's completed in the drone. What is my process in post-processing? So obviously the first thing I do is take out the SD card, or if it's my Mavic 3 Pro on the SSD connected. Either way, same thing. You want to extract your footage. You want to dump all your content from the memory card, from the storage unit, over to your computer. I usually transfer over to an SSD. When doing raw hyperlapses and you're capturing 400 to 500 shots at a time, you're gonna have massive files. So I like to use an SSD and use that as my starting point, transfer everything to my SSD. Then what I do is you're gonna notice different folders created for each of your raw hyperlapses within your, the folder that you transfer over. Then what I like to do is go ahead and transfer that into Lightroom. So I just do one set at a time. So each hyperlapse, transfer all 400 photos from that one particular hyperlapse into Lightroom. I find one of the images. So if, for example, if it's 400, I find one specific image, I edit that image to my liking. So I do, a color grade. I go ahead and make sure that the exposure is right. I adjust the white balance. I adjust the clarity, the sharpening, all that good stuff. And then I copy those settings or those edited settings and I paste it to the rest of the group. So I paste it to the remaining 399 shots if I did a 400 shot hyperlapse. Then next, you're gonna want to export that. So what I do is just right click on the bottom of Lightroom, export, and then I export it as a sequence. That's very important. You want to make sure that every still photo exports in a sequential order. So you want to have a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4 after the file name. So I do a customized file name. So for example, Far Rockaway Beach Hyperlapse 1, and then sequence. So it's going to name every file Far Rockaway Beach Hyperlapse 1, 1, Far Rockaway Hyperlapse Far Rockaway Beach Hyperlapse 2, 1, 2. So it's going to name every single file in sequential order. Finally, you open up Premiere Pro. I use Premiere Pro only to stabilize my hyperlapses. I gave up on Premiere Pro. I now edit in Final Cut Pro. So I open up Premiere Pro. I import this file. You're going to see a little radio button that says import as a sequence. That's very important because that's going to take all your images and it's going to import it as a video. So it's going to stitch everything together. I drop that into my sequence. And then I go ahead and stabilize. Now, when stabilizing in Premiere Pro, I unselect the fast stabilization and I make sure that I select the detail stabilization. And that's going to ensure that it is analyzing my frame, frame by frame, and it's taking its time because it's not processing in a fast manner. But what this is going to do is going to take much longer. But what this is going to do is it's going to ensure a very successful smooth hyperlapse. Even in sometimes rough conditions, I'm able to get some really smooth hyperlapses when exporting it, when stabilizing, I mean. Then the next step is exporting. You go ahead and you take that file and you export it as an MP4, and you want to make sure you use a high bitrate because in my instance, I'm going to then go ahead and import that into Final Cut Pro and make it and include it as part of my greater project, similar to what I did here when shooting this video. All the hyperlapses you saw as part of this video were exported already and went through this workflow, and I'm importing it again into Premiere Pro as my final product. All right, so that is my detailed process and explanation of how I achieve the hyperlapses. All the examples you saw today followed that specific process, and those 3 types of hyperlapses, the Courselock, the Waypoint, or the circle, in that particular order. Hyperlapses require a huge investment of time. I know it's not fun setting a hyperlapse up and waiting 20 to 30 minutes for it to complete its 400 to 500 shots. I know that's not fun at all, and you need to have a lot of patience. And then even thinking about my process, going ahead and post and going through all those various steps is a huge time investment. But I promise you, and as you saw, it is a rewarding time experience. It is a rewarding investment in time. The output is just so fantastic to be able to capture emotion and time in such a unique way with utilizing a drone. Finally, what I do want to mention is you need to also be okay with horrible hyperlapses. Not all your hyperlapses are going to look as good as the ones I demonstrated. I've shot many hyperlapses where I thought it was going good. Once I land, I usually look at the DJI generated file to kind of get an idea or perspective. Is the hyperlapse good? Is it bad? And if it's bad, is it savable? And what you're going to notice is a lot of them sometimes are not going to be, I'm sorry, not a lot of them, but a few are not going to be salvageable or savable. You're going to see that even if you follow the process, a lot of times the biggest problem is that you can't stabilize it in post. There's going to be so much movement in the air, and your drone is going to be bouncing in so many different ways that when you try to stabilize it, it's just not going to look as smooth. And you need to be okay with that. Not every single hyperlapse is going to be 100% success rate. There's going to be some good ones and there's going to be some bad ones. Now, with the good hyperlapse, the good news is that they look fantastic, as I've already demonstrated. And the beauty about hyperlapses is that you can use them not only for your short form platforms such as Instagram, TikTok, X, but you can also use them and incorporate them in your long form content. So hyperlapses are extremely diversified in terms of where you can start utilizing and showcasing your work. And for some additional great content creators that create some amazing hyperlapses, make sure that you check Billy Kyle if you haven't done so already on Instagram. He's been putting a lot of work into hyperlapses, and in fact, he's the one that has really encouraged me to do some of these long exposure hyperlapses with these GPS drones. Another great individual to follow is Invisible Storm, and I'll leave both of their links in the description below. Invisible Storm is another pilot that's here local to New York, and he does some really amazing work when it comes to hyperlapses. He actually does some very creative things with AI, inverting hyperlapses and doing a mirror look. There's so much creativity that you can do with hyperlapse. There's so many different ways that you can manipulate those files, and both Billy and Invisible Storm, what they have in common is that they also follow a similar workflow where they're not just launching the drone, doing a hyperlapse and using the generated DJI file. They're actually investing the time and going through the process. Now, I'll close this video by saying that I've also been doing this exact same thing with the Osmo Pocket 3. So not only do I love capturing, time lapse essentially with a drone via the air, but I also like doing it from the ground. Now, you can do this with cameras as well, but the difference with cameras is that your hyperlapses are very static. They're usually facing one specific way, right? So if you have, a Sony mirrorless camera, for example, that time lapse is going to be focused at a specific subject looking one way. There's no movement. Now with the Pocket 3, I've been doing a lot of motion lapses where I can customize a route similar to like the drone, right? Different waypoints. The only difference here is that the pocket is not moving, the pocket is static, but the gimbal is moving, so you can adjust waypoints, and I've been having a lot of fun with that. Now with the Pocket 3, you can, and I'll save this for another video, you can do hyperlapses where you're moving, similar to like a Courselock or similar to like Waypoints, where you're actually moving the Pocket 3 in a steady manner. And I'm gonna do that video in the next weeks. But in today's video, I'll demonstrate to you today some quick examples of a hyperlapse with the Pocket 3. So that's pretty much all that I wanted to share with you today, guys. Let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know if hyperlapses is something that you're working on, and let me know finally if this was helpful. I hope it was, because I found it extremely helpful when I learned this creative process on how to do the hyperlapses, and I wanted to make sure that I pay it forward and share it with you all today. So that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for continuing to support my channel, and I promise more drone stuff on the channel, unless less advertisements, right? Let's call it what it is. Less advertisements of products and more drone creation happening. And that's all. Until next time, peace.